From the outside, my family probably looked normal, maybe even close. We had the yearly vacations, the loud dinners, the photo-perfect moments that would make anyone scrolling through social media think, wow, what a happy family. And in a way, that's how I used to see it too. I thought we were good. I thought I was part of something solid. But under all that smiling and small talk, there was this crack. This silent truth that I was never really in with them. I was the different one. The odd piece that never quite fit into the puzzle. My siblings? They had their lanes paved out for them. Good schools, steady jobs, clear paths. And me? Well, I was the one they'd tilt their heads at and say, "So, what are you doing with your life these days?" It wasn't even always the words. Sometimes it was just the look. That half smile, half smirk, like they already knew I didn't have an answer that would impress them. But I tried. God, I tried. I went along with their conversations, even when I had nothing to add. I laughed at their jokes, even when the joke was me. I'd pitch in during family dinners, helping mom set the table, thinking maybe if I just showed up enough, I'd be seen as equal. Sometimes I even convinced myself it was working. That maybe, just maybe, I was imagining the distance. There were these little moments, though, moments that in hindsight feel so much louder. Like one Christmas, when my brother unwrapped this expensive watch my dad had bought him. Everyone clapped, everyone admired it, and then it was my turn to open my gift. A plain t-shirt. Don't get me wrong, I was grateful, but sitting there, holding up that shirt while everyone's attention shifted back to the gleam of that watch. It was like I had been handed proof of where I stood in the hierarchy. And you know what's strange? I didn't even get angry back then. I laughed. I played along. I told myself it didn't matter. Because when you grow up constantly trying to belong, you get used to minimizing your own hurt. You convince yourself it's fine. You're fine. But deep down, I wasn't. I was just waiting that I didn't know it then. But that quiet storm was already building inside me. It's funny how the smallest words can stick to you like glue, long after they're spoken. My family had this way of turning me into their favorite punchline, without ever calling it bullying. To them, it was just a joke. But to me, it was like being reminded over and over again that I didn't measure up. I can still hear it. My uncle's voice at one barbecue. "Oh, look who finally showed up. Mr. Going Nowhere." Everyone laughed. My cousins clapped their hands like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. I forced a smile, pretended to laugh too, but inside it stung. The worst part? No one corrected him. Not even my parents. Not a single, "Hey, that's enough." Just laughter echoing in the backyard while I stood there, swallowing my pride with a paper plate full of food I suddenly couldn't eat. And it wasn't just the big moments. It was in the everyday comments, the sideways glances, the sarcasm. Dipped in sugar. Still figuring out what you want to do, huh? Not everyone's meant to succeed, and that's okay. Maybe you'll surprise us one day. Each line delivered with a chuckle, like they were doing me a favor by keeping it light. But the truth is, every laugh chipped away at me. There's one night that still replays in my head. We were on the couch after dinner, everyone buzzing about careers and promotions, and my sister leaned over with that grin and said, "Don't worry, we'll save a spot for you at the kids' table." Everybody roared. I laughed too because, what else do you do? But later, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, those words kept circling in my head. Going nowhere, kids' table, aimless. I didn't cry. I just felt small. Like maybe they were right. And that's the thing about subtle insults. You start to believe them. You start carrying them around like they're part of your identity. So when I showed up at family events, I already expected to be dismissed. It became this silent agreement. I'd play my role, they'd play theirs, and we'd all pretend it was harmless. Looking back, I wonder how many of them even realized what they were doing. Did they ever notice how quiet I'd go afterward? Did they see me picking at my food, forcing smiles, avoiding eye contact? Or was I just invisible in those moments, my pain drowned out by their laughter? I'll never know. What I do know is, those little digs, those harmless jokes, they planted seeds. Seeds of resentment, of determination. Seeds I didn't even realize were growing until much later. Every story has that one moment, the one you can trace everything back to. For me, it was during a family vacation. You'd think vacations were supposed to be a break from reality, right? A time to relax, recharge, maybe even feel closer. But that year, it was different. That year, the mask slipped. We were sitting at this long wooden table in the resort dining hall. The kind of place with chandeliers that try a little too hard, and waiters who pour water like it's champagne. My family was in full performance mode, laughing loud, ordering big, telling stories like they were the stars of some sitcom. I was just there, nodding along, pushing my food around, trying to blend in. Then it happened. My brother, in that loud, attention-grabbing voice he always used, leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, every year we come here, and every year, nothing changes. Look at us, moving forward, building lives, and look at him. Still, going nowhere." The table erupted. Even my parents laughed. And I swear, the waiter standing by the corner smirked too. I don't know if he actually did, or if it was just my imagination feeding the humiliation, but in that moment, it felt like the whole damn room was laughing at me that I tried to laugh it off, but my voice cracked. My fork slipped and hit the plate. Too loud, drawing more eyes my way. My face burned hot, my chest tightened, and for the first time, I couldn't fake it anymore. I excused myself, muttering something about the bathroom, and walked out before they could see my hands shaking. I still remember the hallway outside, cold air conditioning blowing against my skin. The patterned carpet that looked like it hadn't been changed since the 90s. I stood there, staring at this stupid framed painting of a sailboat, trying to breathe, trying not to fall apart. My heart was racing, my ears buzzing with their laughter echoing in my head. Going nowhere, going nowhere, going nowhere. That was the moment. The exact second something in me snapped. Not the kind of snap where you yell or fight back. I wasn't brave enough for that yet. No, it was quieter, colder, like a door slamming shut inside me that I realized right then. I couldn't keep living as their punchline. If I stayed in that role, I'd never escape it. They'd keep laughing, and I'd keep shrinking. I didn't know how or when, but I promised myself that night. I was going to change everything. They thought I was going nowhere. Fine. I'd let them think that. But deep down, in that hallway with the ugly carpet and the sailboat painting, I made a silent vow. One day, they'd choke on those words. After that night at the resort, something inside me just shut down. I didn't yell. I didn't confront them. I didn't even try to prove them wrong anymore. I froze, like a river in winter, still moving somewhere underneath, but on the surface, silent. Untouchable. At family gatherings, I became a ghost in my own chair. I'd smile when necessary, not at the right times, laugh just enough so no one could say I was sulking. But the truth was, I'd already pulled away. Conversations that used to sting now just washed over me like background noise. It was easier to feel nothing than to feel everything. I stopped sharing pieces of myself. If they asked what I was doing with my life, I gave short, vague answers. Oh, you know, figuring things out. No details, no openings for jokes. I built this invisible wall, not brick by brick, but insult by insult, until it stood tall between us. And behind that wall, I started planning. Quietly, secretly. The strangest part? They didn't even notice. My absence, even when I was sitting right there, went completely unseen. My silence blended perfectly into their noise. They joked, they drank, they bragged about promotions and vacations, and I just faded into the background. And maybe, in a twisted way, that was the gift they gave me. The freedom to disappear. Right under their noses while I figured out who I really was. I remember one dinner where my father asked my sister about her new car. She went on and on about the leather seats, the sound system, the smell of it fresh off the lot. Everyone leaned in, clapped, toasted her. Then my mom turned to me and said, "And you?" Still doing nothing. I didn't flinch. I just smiled faintly, sipped my drink, and let the silence hang there. For the first time, I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to convince them of anything. And you know what? The moment passed. The conversation moved on without me, like I was just optional. But inside, the freeze was protecting me. Because when you stop reacting, you stop giving them power. And when you stop giving them power, you finally have room to focus on something else. On yourself. I used to think the freeze was weakness, retreating, hiding, shutting down. But, looking back, it was the strongest thing I ever did. Because while they thought I was going nowhere, I was carving out the space to finally go somewhere they could never follow. The freeze gave me something I hadn't had in years: silence. And in that silence, I finally had room to breathe, to think, to build. It didn't happen overnight. There was no lightning bolt moment where I suddenly became successful. No, it was slower, messier. Like climbing a staircase in the dark, one shaky step at a time, not even sure if the next one would hold. I remember those nights more vividly than anything. Sitting alone in my tiny apartment, the kind where the walls are thin enough to hear your neighbor's TV, hunched over a secondhand laptop with a screen that flickered if you tilted it wrong. My desk was just an old kitchen table with one wobbly leg, and my chair. Well, let's just say it creaked more than it supported. But it was mine. That space, as small and worn out as it was, became my war room. While my family was out taking vacations or posting pictures of their new cars, I was glued to that screen, scouring forums, reading articles, watching videos on business, real estate, investing, anything that might point me toward a way out. I was starving, not for food, though, honestly, there were nights ramen was all I could afford, but for a chance. For proof that I wasn't what they said I was. There were failures. Plenty. Deals that fell through. Side hustles that never made it past the idea phase. Times when I'd check my bank account and wonder if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life by believing I could ever be more. But then there were these tiny sparks, little wins that kept me alive. A small freelance job that actually paid. A flip that made just enough profit to cover 2 months' rent. Each one was like a handhold on that invisible staircase, pulling me up a little higher, and oh, one knew. Not my parents, not my siblings. I kept it all hidden. When they'd ask, I'd give the same vague answers, the same half smile. Because this grind, this climb, wasn't for them. It wasn't for their approval. It was mine. My secret, my lifeline. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit back in my chair, rubbing my tired eyes, and imagine the future. I'd picture myself standing tall, not as their punchline, not as going nowhere, but as someone they couldn't ignore anymore. That vision, it fueled me. Even when my body was exhausted, even when doubt clawed at my chest, I kept going. Looking back, those years were brutal. Lonely, but they were also sacred. Because it was in that loneliness, in that grind, that I started becoming someone new. Someone my family had never seen before. Someone I wasn't even sure I believed in yet, but was determined to meet. There's this strange thing about working in the dark. Most of the time, it feels like you're clawing at nothing. You pour hours, days, months into something, and it feels like it's barely moving. And then, suddenly, one small break changes everything. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday morning. Funny, right? No special day, no big build-up. Just an ordinary Tuesday that cracked open my entire future. I had been chasing deals for months, mostly dead ends. Reaching out, cold calling, emailing people who never replied. I'd grown used to silence. But that morning, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. A man's voice on the other end said, "Hey, I saw your proposal. Let's talk." My heart nearly stopped. I scrambled for a notepad, trying to sound calm while my hands were sweating so much the pen almost slipped. It wasn't a huge deal. By most standards, a small property investment, the kind bigger players wouldn't even blink at. But to me, it was everything. A chance to prove I wasn't just going nowhere. I still remember walking into that office for the first time. The smell of polished wood, the sharp click of my cheap shoes against marble floors that made me feel so out of place. I was terrified they'd see right through me, that they'd know I was just a kid with more determination than experience. But somehow, the words came. I talked, they listened, and when I walked out with that signed agreement in my hand, it felt like holding gold. That deal gave me more than money. It gave me momentum, confidence. It was like the universe had cracked. The door opened just enough to whisper, "See? You can do this." And I didn't stop there. I reinvested every dollar, every cent. I lived cheap, ate cheap, wore the same clothes for years, because all that mattered was climbing higher. With each success, no matter how small, the weight of their words, going nowhere, grew lighter. I was still quiet around my family, still keeping my cards close to my chest, but inside, the tide was shifting. There were nights I'd sit in that same creaky chair, staring at my growing numbers on the screen, and this grin would spread across my face. Not because I wanted to brag, but because for the first time in my life, I knew I was building something real. Something they could never take away with a laugh or a joke. That first big deal wasn't just money. It was proof. Proof that the nobody they dismissed was slowly, quietly, becoming somebody. You ever have one of those moments where life feels like it's come full circle? Like the universe has this dark sense of humor, and suddenly you're standing in the very place where your pain began. Except this time, everything's different. That was me, the day I signed the papers to their resort. The very one my family had paraded through year after year. The same dining hall where I'd once sat humiliated. The same hallway where I'd stared at that ugly sailboat painting, promising myself I'd change everything. Now, I wasn't the punchline at the table. I was the name on the deed that I'll never forget the feeling of the pen in my hand. Heavy, slick against my fingers. The quiet scratch of it against the thick paper. My signature curling across the line felt almost surreal, like I was writing a different life into existence. Across the desk, the seller slid the folder shut, smiled, and said, "Congratulations. It's yours now." Mind that I didn't shout. I didn't jump up in triumph. I just sat there, still, as the weight of it sank in. The silence in that office was so different from the silence I'd known at family dinners. This silence was victory. Walking the property afterward was even stranger. The air smelled the same, salt from the ocean, faint chlorine from the pool. But it all felt different. Mine now. The click of my shoes echoed against the tiled lobby floor, and I couldn't help but imagine my family's faces when they walked in next year. How the same staff that once poured them wine and carried their luggage would now be working under my name that I lingered in the dining hall, tracing my fingers along the edge of the long wooden table. The same table where I'd been laughed at, where going nowhere became a nickname etched into me like a scar. And now, that table was sitting in my resort. A scar turned trophy. The best part? Nobody knew. I kept the secret tucked away like a loaded card in my back pocket. My family went on with their lives, still laughing, still bragging, completely unaware that the next time they booked their annual trip, they'd be stepping straight into my world. That purchase wasn't just business. It wasn't just a property. It was the answer to every insult, every smirk, every night I'd spent questioning if I was worth anything at all, that I had been going nowhere, sure. But somehow, nowhere had led me exactly here. The day finally came. My family's annual pilgrimage to their resort. Except this time, the resort wasn't theirs. It was mine that I didn't tell them beforehand. No hints, no slip-ups. I wanted them to walk in blind, to experience the shift the way I had imagined it 100 times in my head. I remember standing just out of sight as they arrived, bags in tow, voices carrying through the lobby like they owned the place. My brothers laugh, my sisters chatter, my parents making little comments about how nice it felt to be back. Same scene as every year, like clockwork. Except this year, the staff greeted them differently. "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. underscore underscore underscore," the concierge said politely. And then, with the slightest bow of respect, "We'll make sure everything is perfect for your stay. Mr. underscore 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 S instructions." My father frowned. Mr. underscore 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 S instructions? He didn't understand yet. Not at first. My mother brushed it off, already fussing with the luggage. But I saw the flicker of confusion begin to spread as staff members kept glancing toward me. Not with pity, not with amusement, but with deference. When I finally stepped forward, it was like slow motion. Their voices dimmed. My shoes echoed against the polished floor, each step loud enough to feel like a drumbeat. My siblings looked at me with that familiar smirk, ready to crack a joke. But the jokes didn't come. Not when they saw the manager walk over to me first. "Sir, the penthouse suite is prepared, just as you requested." I nodded, eyes fixed on my family. That was it. That was the moment. Silence wrapped around the room like a curtain dropping after the final act of a play. My brother's smile faltered. My sister's jaw tightened. My parents exchanged a look, half disbelief, half discomfort. I didn't have to say a word. They understood. They knew that I walked past them, slowly, deliberately, my hand brushing against the same reception desk where we'd once checked in together. I caught a glimpse of their reflection in the polished surface, frozen, speechless, like statues carved out of shock. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the punchline. I was the headline. There was no gloating, no dramatic monologue. Just that heavy, loaded silence. The kind that said everything words couldn't. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand there, owning what they swore you'd never achieve. They had called me going nowhere. And now, here they were, vacationing in my nowhere. You'd think the reveal would have ended in applause, or maybe some dramatic movie-like confrontation. But reality? Reality is much quieter, much messier. At first, no one said anything. My family just stood there, processing, their expressions shifting like clouds caught in a storm. My brother tried to laugh it off, this nervous, brittle sound. Wait, are you kidding? You? You own this place. But even as he said it, I could see his eyes darting around, looking for proof it wasn't true that my mother was the first to break. She forced a smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, and said, "Well, good for you." Like it was some small accomplishment, like I'd just passed a test she hadn't studied for. My father stayed silent, jaw tight, the kind of silence that carries more weight than words ever could. And me? I stood there calm, maybe too calm, like I'd rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times. Because I had. Every late night working, every insult swallowed, every sarcastic chuckle I'd endured. I'd replayed this exact scenario, imagined their faces, their reactions. And now here it was. Real. But the strangest thing happened. Instead of pure triumph, instead of that euphoric rush I thought I'd feel, something heavier settled in my chest. A sadness, almost. Because watching them stumble over their words, watching the discomfort spread, I realized I hadn't wanted revenge. Not really. What I'd wanted, deep down, all along, was their respect, their pride, their belief in me. And even now, especially now, I didn't have it. Congratulations, sidelong glances that said, "How did we miss this? How did we underestimate him?" Later, at dinner, the roles had flipped. The staff greeted me first, checked in on me before them. My siblings kept sneaking glances my way, trying to gauge if I was enjoying their discomfort. And maybe a small part of me was. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of trying to prove myself to people who never really saw me in the first place. That night, as I sat alone in the penthouse. Sweet, my penthouse, I looked out at the ocean. The same waves my family had admired for years, the same horizon they always toasted to. And I realized something. The validation I had been chasing wasn't coming. Not from them. Not ever. And maybe that was okay, because the truth was, I didn't need their approval anymore. I had built a life, a future, a version of myself they swore I could never be. That was enough. More than enough. Standing there, in that resort I now owned, watching my family try to reconcile the person they thought I was with the reality standing in front of them. I realized something I wish I'd learned sooner. All those years, I thought, I was fighting for their approval. Every late night, every sacrifice, every risk I took. Deep down, I wanted them to look at me and finally say, "We're proud of you." But that night in the penthouse, staring out at the ocean, it hit me. Their approval was never mine to win. Because some people, no matter how much you prove yourself, will never see you clearly. They'll keep looking at you through the old lens they've built in their heads. And fighting to change that lens? It's a battle you can never win. The funny part is, I didn't need them to change anymore. The proof was right in front of me. Not in the property, not in the money, not even in the revenge. The real proof was me. The person I had become. The person who refused to stay frozen at that table, who decided that going nowhere was just another way of saying I hadn't arrived yet. And now, I had arrived. I think back sometimes to that night years ago, me standing in that hallway, staring at that ugly sailboat painting, trying not to cry while their laughter echoed in my head. If I could go back, I'd tell that version of me, "Hold on. They don't see you yet, but you're going to surprise even yourself. And when you do, their voices won't matter anymore." That's the real secret, isn't it? Success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about waking up one day and realizing you've built a life you don't need to defend, a life you don't need anyone else to validate. And why family still takes their annual trip. They still sit at those tables, order their champagne, take their pictures. But now, every time they do, there's this quiet knowledge hanging in the air. They're sitting inside a dream they once swore I could never touch. And me? I don't gloat. I don't remind them. I don't need to. Because the loudest revenge isn't laughter or insults or even words. It's peace. Peace in knowing I turned going nowhere into everywhere I was meant to be.